Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, keep your microphones and the camera off. Then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker after her presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming Professor Jill Atkins. First, let me introduce her in a few seconds. Jack Atkins is a chair in financial management at Sheffield University Management School, the University of Sheffield, and is also visiting professor at the University of the Witwatersrand, South Africa, and the University of Pisa. She has published a lot of journal articles in the top-ranking journal, in addition to book chapters. Her research focuses on corporate governance, response, investment, stakeholders accountability, integrated reporting, and extension accounting. Now we will start our seminar with Professor Jill Atkins.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. And also thank you for attending. So I would like to talk today about some new research that we have been doing in the light of the current pandemic and COVID-19 and the devastating impact that is having on all our lives and on the world all over. So I'm going to talk about a paper which we have been researching through interviews over the last couple of months, and it is looking at the implications of COVID-19 for investor engagement on biodiversity and species extinction of species of flora and fauna. If we look at the academic literature over the years, institutional investors have complained about a lack of corporate disclosure on environmental and ecological issues. Consequently, investor engagement and dialogue, that is meetings, private meetings between investors and companies on environmental issues, has evolved with evidence that these private reporting channels are driving corporate accounting and accountability in investment decisions. To date, there has been no research, as far as I know, into the views of the institutional investment community on investor engagement and corporate reporting in the area of biodiversity, life on Earth, and species extinction, despite research showing that companies are increasingly reporting on these issues. Although extinction accounting and engagement frameworks have been developed in the literature, which incorporate biodiversity and species protection. And I'll talk a bit more about those frameworks at the end, if you're interested in looking at them. Given growing evidence of links between biodiversity loss, species extinction, and unfortunately COVID-19 and coronaviruses, we anticipate that investors and companies will have a much heightened focus on biodiversity and extinction in the wake of COVID-19. A financial rationale for species protection and extinction prevention, as well as for enhancing biodiversity and protecting habitats, has been built up around the interconnectedness of all life on Earth, and particularly the reliance of humans on natural capital, as it's called, on flora and fauna for human survival. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES for short, estimate now that 1 million species are currently threatened with extinction. That's an unfortunate problem. It's something which ethically seems wrong, but the financial implications from biodiversity loss and habitat degradation are now well documented. Other side effects now of anthropogenic ecological degeneration and destruction are beginning to emerge. It is increasingly clear that other high consequence risks are amassing as a result of anthropogenic loss of species, biodiversity, and habitat. Excuse me. Human destruction of biodiversity creates the conditions for new viruses and diseases, such as COVID-19. Human activities, such as road building, mining, hunting and logging, triggered the Ebola epidemics in the 1990s. Shrinking natural habitats and changing behaviour add to the risk of diseases spilling over from animals to humans. When habitat and biodiversity decline, the buffer between humans and the natural world weakens, and pathogens spill over to human populations, which can cause pandemics such as the COVID-19, which we're currently experiencing the world over. The vast illegal wildlife trade and humanity's excessive intrusion into nature are now seen to be blamed for the coronavirus pandemic. Disease ecologists argue that viruses and other pathogens transmit from animals to humans in informal markets that provide fresh meat to fast-growing urban populations around the world, with animals being slaughtered and sold in front of the customer. Countries need to act to prevent future pandemics by banning wet markets that sell live and dead animals for human consumption. It is not only transmission of coronavirus from land animals and bats, for example, to humans that is of concern. There is now growing scientific evidence that marine animals, marine mammals, such as dolphins and beluga whales, may carry similar diseases. COVID-19 reminds us that upsetting the balance of nature and interfering directly with wild animal species can threaten the very existence of humans on the planet. Human extinction is now a real and terrifying possibility and perhaps reality. Our research study aims firstly to explore perceptions of the institutional investor and governance community towards the impact of COVID-19 on extinction accounting and engagement. Secondly, we attempt to render pandemic risk and risk management as an explicit element of the existing extinction accounting and extinction engagement frameworks so that they be implemented throughout investor engagement and throughout integrated reporting. Institutional investors have in recent years escalated their engagement in practice with investee companies on issues relating to biodiversity. In the specific area of engagement and dialogue on biodiversity and natural capital, there is very little research in the academic sphere, which I think is a reflection of the newness of this area of practice within the investment industry. However, some practitioner writings have identified the development of engagement practice in this area on bees and pollinators, for example, and on marine stewardship and fish and seafood species. Given the increasingly obvious connections between biodiversity loss, habitat loss, species extinction threats, and the COVID-19 pandemic, it is, we believe, imperative that responsible investors incorporate elements from these areas into engagement to enhance financial resilience and to contribute to preventing further pandemics. Further, there is likely to be a growing demand from the responsible investment community for public reporting by their investee companies on biodiversity, habitat protection, species extinction prevention, and other factors relating to potential pandemics. Investor engagement on biodiversity will fuel the production of such reporting by investee companies. The past year has witnessed a wide range of initiatives launched by the financial community to explore embedding biodiversity and natural capital into the financial system more deeply. Investec Bank hosted an event titled Natural Capital, Species Extinction and Sustainable Financial Markets on the 29th of May 2019, almost a year ago, at which the Species Protection Action Plan for the financial markets was officially launched by myself and a practitioner colleague and academic colleague, Martina McPherson, who is working for Moody's. Excuse me. Our research study involved conducting a series of interviews recently with institutional investors and governance experts working with responsible investment to garner their thoughts on the links between COVID-19 accounting for biodiversity, species extinction, and the role of investor engagement. This work is being carried out by myself, by Abia Hassan, a colleague of mine who works in Glasgow, by Warren Maroon, a professor in South Africa at Johannesburg in the Witwatersrand University, and also by Federica Dona, a colleague of mine in Milan, in Italy. Our research method was forced to adapt to the confines of the ongoing pandemic context. Although we would normally, of course, have chosen to conduct face-to-face interviews, social distancing measures and the lockdowns worldwide meant this was not possible. We have therefore conducted interviews via any media platform that we could actually access and which interviewees felt comfortable with, given restrictions and limitations, including time zone, working hours, and various commitments on the part of interviewers and interviewees. Therefore, our interview data was collected via Skype, Zoom, telephone, email dialogue, all sorts of different ways to gather the most up-to-date views and reactions from senior level actors within the financial markets across continents, looking at specifically financial markets in Italy, South Africa, and the UK, representing a range of European and Southern African areas. Our interviews were carried out during April and May, and our interviewees were asked to talk broadly in response to three general overarching research questions, which are: how do you think investor engagement on ecosystem services, biodiversity, and species extinction could assist in preventing another pandemic in the future? Secondly, do you think that COVID-19 has affected investor demand for corporate disclosures on biodiversity, species extinction, and related areas? Thirdly, will biodiversity reporting and extinction accounting be given more attention in the wake of COVID-19? We had 27 responses from very high-level actors within financial services and governance. We analysed the interviews and found some really interesting and very important results, I think, not just for financial markets and accounting, but for humanity as well. First of all, we found that the interviewees emphasised the interdependence of investor engagement and reporting on biodiversity and species extinction, and the ways in which investor demand for biodiversity-related information and engagement processes represent a primary driver of reporting in these areas, which adds to external drivers of increased accounting for biodiversity, such as the initiatives from the United Nations and various different national initiatives, in addition to heightened societal awareness worldwide and pressures for greater accountability. One South African risk analyst who contributed to our interview survey connected humanity's treatment of nature with not only the roots of the current pandemic, but also with business activities in terms of mining, for example, and other points where people come into direct contact with wildlife. The interviewees emphasised that COVID-19 has raised societal awareness around human impacts on nature to a higher level than has ever been the case in the past. There was an unambiguous view among many of our interviewees that engagement, that's investor engagement on biodiversity, extinction and related issues, could potentially prevent another pandemic, if not at least reduce the likelihood of this happening again. One interviewee, a specialist in ESG investment particularly, said that, a quote from this person, investor engagement is a prerequisite to identify, assess and report on progress in species extinction, species loss prevention, mitigation, governance and accounting. Interviewees also commented that COVID-19 seems to be a catalyst, shifting attitudes around biodiversity to a higher level. Furthermore, interviewees asserted that biodiversity has actually been eclipsed or overshadowed by the issues relating to climate change, but that this shadowing will change in the wake of COVID-19. Biodiversity loss and species extinction are at least equal as threats to humanity and humanity's survival in the long term. The interviewees believed that in response to COVID-19, we were now witnessing a raising of consciousness, a raising of awareness of the importance of enhancing biodiversity habitats and prevention of species extinction at a societal level and throughout business and investment institutions. Further, our interviewees described COVID-19 as a crisis point, a tsunami, a catalyst, a stepping stone, a piece of alchemy, even a reincarnation. This perception was also associated with a feeling of hope that despite the ongoing global human tragedy and its repercussions on economies the world over, positive change in attitude and behaviour would and could ensue from this crisis. Given the endorsement by the majority of our interviewees that there is an urgent need to integrate pandemic risk into engagement and into corporate disclosure, we now turn to considering how we can make it explicit within the existing extinction accounting and engagement frameworks, which have been published in various academic journals, including AAAJ in Australia, and also a couple of books that we've produced. The latest versions of the Extinction Accounting Framework and Engagement Framework may be adapted to incorporate pandemic risk management. Our interviewees indicated that biodiversity, species extinction, and related issues will receive heightened attention in accounting and investor engagement. Consequently, we've established a series of intervention points where investors, through engagement and dialogue, can intervene in order to reduce the risk of pandemics in the future, based around the linkages between COVID-19, biodiversity decline, species extinction, habitat loss, and related issues. These interventions are expressed as questions that investors can, if they choose, pose to investee organisations and companies, and similarly those questions can be incorporated into reporting, as organisations can take them as a framework for reporting on these issues. I'm not going to go through all of the interventions which we include in our paper, but I'll mention 3 of them. So, for example, an investor who's engaging with an investee company can ask the management, the directors, how do you protect against wildlife trafficking and poaching through to your value and supply chain? This could be identified to be particularly relevant for investors engaging in companies in the airline industry, for example, shipping industry, where they need to secure up possibilities of wildlife trafficking, the agriculture and farming industry, tourism, the hotel industries. Another question which investors could ask investee companies is, how do you ensure that every part of your value and supply chain takes precautions to avoid cross-species contamination from animals to employees, to customers, to other stakeholders? Again, if we think about which industries this would work for, it would involve investors asking questions of companies in food industry, production and retail, agriculture, farming, the timber and paper industry, because of the close contact of these industries with forests and natural areas of wildlife, mining and extractives, the fishing and seafood industry, because now we have evidence, the scientific community has found of coronavirus in sea living mammals such as whales, and also again tourism and hotels. Thirdly, how do you ensure that your value and supply chain has no connection with what we call wet markets or human consumption of endangered wildlife, such as pangolin and bats? Again, the hotel industry, the food industry is another area where these issues could possibly be intervened upon throughout the value chain. So that's just giving you a flavour of some of the work that we've produced in this area recently and the new research findings that we have come up with. We can see from the findings of our study that enhancing biodiversity, protecting species from extinction, preventing deforestation, protecting habitat and ecosystems no longer relies solely on ethical arguments or cases of financial risk management, but also have an imperative around human health and survival as a result of COVID-19. Excuse me. There may also be legal liabilities and issues of human rights for organisations that do not take precautions to protect their stakeholders from contamination, for example, in the ways outlined above. The cataclysmic impact of one isolated instance of coronavirus transmission from a wild animal to one human on global trade, global economies, and on the global financial system is only just beginning to be revealed. Pandemic risks have to be made explicit within our accounting frameworks and our investor engagement processes in order to ensure that another strand of coronavirus is never transmitted to humans again. Protection of businesses, the financial markets, and people from pandemics needs to be made explicit within accounting, finance, and governance frameworks as critical elements of all systems of internal control and risk management. COVID-19 has catapulted responsible investor engagement on biodiversity and species protection, as well as accounting for biodiversity and extinction accounting, onto centre stage. The challenge now is to keep these crucial financial market mechanisms at the forefront of practice and policy in order to enhance resilience and to protect the world from a recurrence of the current pandemic. In conclusion, I would like to say that a challenge for all of us, as the world is starting to recover, hopefully, from COVID-19, is to keep biodiversity and species extinction on the centre stage so that financial markets, businesses and society around the world do not return to the pre-pandemic state of relative blindness, but move forward with raised consciousness and greater awareness of the links between these factors and the need to act upon them. So I'm going to stop there. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you're still all there and that you could hear me.
Okay, I hear you.
Any questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Prof. Shell, for your offer, for your contributions and effort. Right now, Professor Shell will answer any questions. Please, if you have any questions, you can open your mic and ask the questions. After asking the question, you can close, please, your mic.
I think it's silenced everybody.
Hello, Professor Jane.
Hello.
First, thank you for this great seminar. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Mustafa Khaggag. I'm a PhD student in University of Science and Technology, Beijing, China. I found this topic is interesting because now in China, this is like all the people talk about it, and all the people talk about the effect of COVID-19 in the investors' decision in the future, and the investing, the business in general. But I would like to ask about how to is there like a connection between corporate social responsibility and like biodiversity and extinction accounting? Can we extend this to take into consideration this area of accounting and responsibility accounting? Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, I think that it's an absolute core part of CSR, corporate social responsibility. So if you think about the SDGs, for example, which are now core to CSR approaches, they cover life on land and life in water. I think it's SDGs number 14 and 15. Also, if you look at the United Nations efforts in terms of protecting humanity, ecosystems and biodiversity are crucial to that. So corporate social responsibility certainly in my mind covers issues of society, human rights, treatment of employees, but also environmental issues, which include climate change and also, of course, ecological factors. And as I said at the beginning, the protection of biodiversity and species is so interlinked with humanity's survival and the survival of businesses. We only have to think of ecosystem services such as pollination to see how important it is. And if we lose bee species and other pollinators, we won't have food. produced because of a lack of pollination. I think does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Can I ask another question, please? I want to know about the analysis, is there like statistical analysis or because you said there was an interview, 27 response, I think. How did you use these responses in order to put a conclusion or how to say it in English, a fixed result, this is a conclusion of the research, and to make this conclusion is accepted, this is a conclusion really, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, well, I suppose from a research method point of view, we've used standard interview method and standard interview analysis from semi-structured interviews. So we've analysed the data from the interviews, which is the transcripts and the quotations, in order to interpretively detect themes in those analyses. So really very standard sort of interview type analysis, not statistical, not positivistic. So, we'd have not developed an approach around positive type statistics and, hypothesis testing. What we've done is an interpretive approach, which is a different approach and the usual one in social science and in more qualitative research method. And the conclusions are very clear. I mean, obviously, if you read the full paper, there are lots of different perspectives and views. Today, what I've done is take out the main findings from our research study.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your response. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can we have a link for the article, or?
It's not quite finished yet. It's only a draft. So this is the first time we've actually presented it, and we're hoping to submit it to a journal quite soon. But this is as if we're doing a seminar presentation in any university. So we're just giving you highlights of the first draft of this paper. But hopefully we'll be able to have a full draft that we can share quite soon, when all of the authors have decided they're happy with the draft that we have at the moment. There's also quite a theoretical component to the paper, which I haven't discussed today. It uses a theoretical framework based around the work of Ulrich Beck, who was a German sociologist, and he did a lot of work on what he called risk society. So the paper also draws on a theoretical framework as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your time and effort. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, Doctor.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm okay, thank you.
I want to ask you about the effect of CSR from pandemic COVID-19 on employment.
Sorry?
The employments.
Unemployment.
Yes,
well, this is not what we focused on in our paper, but there is going to be a massive impact. Well, there is already a massive economic impact, which is going to have to be dealt with in the short term and probably the medium term. So the issues that I'm focusing on are very much more medium to long term, to try to enhance financial and system resilience to these things. But the short term impact on employees all over the world, I think, is going to be very significant. However, if you look at the UK and the US particularly, have been hard hit, I think, at the moment. And, the economic consequences are going to be very, very significant. One of the interesting issues in relation to CSR is very much about how companies have built resilience to business continuity plans and risks of these types of catastrophic events. And I think we'll see that some businesses survive better through this economic turmoil than others.
I they will move to machines, more machines in their industries than employees. This is the result from COVID-19 because it's better for them not to lose a lot. So it will be not positive for the employees.
No, I mean, I don't think there's anything really positive about the whole thing at all. And I did hear a discussion on the news the other day about increasing, the use of robots and machinery. But I think that was going to happen anyway. I mean, it's something which has been happening, the use of artificial intelligence and different types of mechanisms. But I think, what COVID-19 has done is speed up changes that are already taking place. So, if you just look at the use of electronic media, we were all moving towards using electronic media more often, more frequently, and now we've been forced to. So, I think that it's a catalyst for all sorts of different things. One of them, as you say, is to probably change working practice permanently. And certainly in the area, as I say, of electronic media, do we need to travel all over the world to have meetings and conferences? And, it's not necessary to put those sorts of pressures on the environment and on the climate anymore.
Thank you.
Excuse me, this is Adil from Yemen.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for your incredible seminar. So my question is that I'm doing now a research on the impact of COVID, the confirmation cases, death number, and cover cases on the stock return. Most of the initial result that I found, most of them as a negative. The stock return now is going down with the COVID. What's your suggestion for this initial result? How where the confirmation cases and the death number, it's logically to go negatively with the COVID, with the stock return, but the covered cases, I didn't found the positive result. What's your suggestion or the what is called the good justification for this result?
There's one word which you said, which I'm not sure about. You said you're looking at the relationship between COVID and deaths and something else?
Stock return. Stock return.
Oh, stock return. Okay, sorry. I'm really sorry. So you didn't find a relationship between it, or you did? If you could just tell me again.
No, I found result, but most of them negative. The confirmation cases and the death number is negative, and also the covered cases.
So are you using data by company or by country?
By company.
By company?
Yes.
I'm just trying to work out what you've done. So you've looked at the number of cases of employees contracting it within a company?
No. For the country, but I already put the same number of cases for all companies.
Okay. That sounds interesting. I'm not quite sure what you would expect to get from that. So what you're saying is that the share prices are going up in relation
to... going down.
They're going down in relation to higher
exactly,
cases?
Yes.
So what you're saying is countries with higher cases of COVID deaths are associated with lower stock return.
Sorry?
You found that countries with higher cases of COVID-19 are associated with lower stock returns in companies.
Yes, most of them as a negative. The relation between the COVID death and confirmation cases with the stock return.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be surprising if that wasn't the case, to be honest. I mean, in a way, it's pretty obvious, but then a lot of research produces findings that we may see as obvious, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I mean, I think it's a useful thing to do, but it really confirms exactly what we would expect, I think. Maybe you could bring some other variables in as well, if that helps.
Inshallah. Thank you so much.
I think that's probably it.
Hello, Professor Julia. I'm Dr. Najib Masood, lecturer in the University in Dubai. Just there's if we involve with the political issues with what you have done, is they can work, we can find the relationship or something, the correlation between the political issues and the COVID with the economics or with the accounting or with the CSRs, whatever?
I think one of the things that needs to happen is that there has to be a political effort, worldwide to address these issues. I know that, for example, the Chinese government has now banned wet markets in certain provinces. I know that there is going to be legislation in these areas. I think one of the weaknesses that we have is a unified political will to address problems, for example, such as biodiversity and these types of issues, deforestation, for example. I mean, at the moment, we've got such diverse responses to COVID. If you look at Brazil, for example, compared with the US, compared with the European response, they're so vastly different. So I think that as well as the things I've been talking about in the financial markets, we obviously need coordination as well with political levels, with governments, with governmental organisations, and with pan-governmental organisations such as the United Nations. I think that unless there is that political will, then things are not going to really improve and improve resilience in the future.
Oh, thank you.
Anything else?
Professor, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, hi. I'm Bianca, a Brazilian student who used yours and Professor Maroon extinction accounting framework to analyze the integrated report of Petrobras with help of Professor Adriana, who is here with us. And I would like to thank you for your research and your work. And to question, what in your view do you expect to be the most urgent step to make?
In relation to extinction accounting, particularly?
Yeah, in the world we live right now with the pandemic, what do you believe to be the most urgent thing to make the financial using the extinction accounting?
Well, I think the thing is, and I'm aware of some of your colleagues and friends that are working in Brazil on extinction accounting as well. I think that we need to try to communicate the urgency of, stopping deforestation. I mean, particularly in Brazil, there's such a terrible problem at the moment. I have used the term, the reason we came up with the term of extinction accounting was to try and address this urgency, to try and communicate the urgent situation that we're in. And I think one of the most important issues that's coming out of COVID-19 is to find that people are realizing that, climate change is a big threat, but it's actually not as big, or at least it's certainly equal to, but maybe less important to the future of humanity than biodiversity loss. We're seeing such massive losses of species extinctions. I remember listening to a presentation around one of the colleagues in Brazil who's looking at extinction accounting and applying it to the development of a dam. I can't remember the name of the dam, where the whole of the forest's been flooded, and it's caused extinctions of many species of birds and animals. So, the linkages between and the interconnectedness between biodiversity loss and human survival because of collapse of ecosystems is so devastating. So I honestly think that COVID-19 might act as some sort of key, some sort of catalyst to get societies, politicians, governments to realise this. But at the moment, we are not seeing that sort of shift at governmental level. Without going into politics too much, you know, it's horrifying to see the response of some governments to the crisis and their blindness to these sorts of issues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Hello, Doctor.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm trying to work out which
Yes.
box you are.
I have a question about what will be the behavior of profiteer of COVID-19.
What will be the what, sorry?
The behaviors of the profiteer company of COVID-19, for example, telecommunication company and pharmaceutical companies, and their role in protect human and environment.
Gosh, I don't know quite what to answer for that. I mean, I think certainly telecommunications and information technology have got a role to play in improving communications in this area, and also in firming up things like, you know, IT and AI, artificial intelligence, around tracking biodiversity issues. I mean, that's relating directly to the area that I'm interested in, you know, trying to track ecosystems and changes. In terms of the wider economic issues, I mean, I'm not actually studying that at the moment, but I think, you know, we're going to see a massive change in businesses and the way that they're working, the way that they're identifying with these issues and in the aftermath. I mean, at the moment, we're in a situation where some countries are still not reaching their peak with COVID-19, and we're still seeing a severe crisis, and we've still got the threat of a second wave in countries where the peak has been passed. So, you know, already after about 3 months, we're seeing massive economic impacts and massive changes in societal attitudes, because everybody is at home. You know, everybody all over the world is like us now, sitting in their lounge, their bedroom, their office, talking to each other and trying to come to terms with what has happened and what is happening, because it's not over yet. So the repercussions, I don't know anything about repercussions on telecommunications particularly, but, you know, the repercussions are going to leave us with a world, I think, which is very different from the one that we were in 6 months ago.
Thank you.
Don't think it really answers your question, but I can't really think of anything else to say. Okay, is that everything?
I have just one question, Jill. Khaled Husseini from University of Portsmouth.
Hello, Khalid.
Hello, Jill. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you, in this strange world. You were the last person we saw before the lockdown when we came to Portsmouth.
Yes, I am. So my question is about how COVID-19 crisis could affect ESG investing. Should we expect like increasing in investing in ESG, or the investing would be lower? I'm not sure what about how companies will react to investing in ESG based on the crisis we have now. What's your view about it?
Well, I think our paper really is, our research is focusing on exactly that. So talking to the people in our interview survey who are all leading people in ESG, most of them are ESG specialists, they see this as an opportunity to actually promote and push for greater ESG investing. I think I actually see this as a key and as a catalyst to increasing ESG investment and engagement, particularly engagement. And, you know, the people that I'm working with, we're working on a book project, I'm working with people like, well, Martina McPherson, who's very involved in the ESG industry. And, you know, we're seeing a massive change in attitudes. So I think certainly the ESG investors see this as an opportunity to say, okay, this is happening and these are the reasons, and a lot of these reasons connect to ESG issues. So it actually gives a stronger basis for moving forward in that area, Khalid, I think.
So is it a positive change or a negative change?
I think it's very difficult to say that something positive is going to come out of this horrible mess. But I personally believe that I think the world will be different afterwards, if there is an afterwards. And I also believe that, you know, the investment industry will have more opportunity to push for these things. We've already seen this week a massive pull out of oil and gas, out of fossil fuels by the church communities, by church, you know, cross-cultural, cross-religious groups all over the world. And I think as people withdraw funding and finance from businesses and industries which are not supportive of long-term environmental and ecological stewardship, then we are seeing and going to see a big shift in the investment industry and a much greater shift towards ESG activism, I think. And I hope so. I mean, to me, that's something positive that can come out of this. But then I'm an eternal optimist.
I have a related question about the corporate governance practice. To what extent the current governance practice fit well with the new normal business model?
Well, it depends which practices we look at. I mean, I'm, as you know, particularly interested in the South African context, and I work with Professor Mervyn King, looking at some of these issues. We've just finished writing a book chapter with Warren Maroon and Mervyn and myself, looking at an ecological governance model, which is basically based around, you know, the concept of a holistic governance model, which is much more akin to what we have in the South African context. So it depends which governance policies and procedures you're looking at. I mean, certainly nothing to do with the biodiversity issues. If you're looking at governance in terms of internal control and risk management and issues of business continuity and planning for crises, as I said earlier, businesses which have better internal control mechanisms in those areas are more likely to survive this crisis than the ones that don't. And that's things like, you know, the ability of them to adapt to social distancing, having measures in place for people to work at home in terms of a crisis like this, which has now happened. Yeah. You know, which companies and businesses have been prepared for those things, which have had the installation of software and, you know, communications where others might not have done. So those sorts of things, and also protection of, from a societal point of view, protection of employees. You know, how many companies, which companies are actually focusing on protecting employees and other stakeholders? You know, which companies have gone to delivering directly to customers and making sure that they keep social distance in deliveries and protect customers as well as employees. So I think there's so many governance issues relating to this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Nice to see you.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, Jill.
Who's that?
It is Mohammed Saoudi from Witwatersrand University.
Yes, my friend.
Hi, Jill. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm better than last week.
All right. Sorry for joining the meeting, the seminar late because of other commitments. I just want to ask you a question about your presentation. I picked up some of your interesting topics. And as you started early, you started to look at accounting from different perspectives, especially for accounting for extinction. So I'm wondering, do we have an urgent need to think about how we can develop new accounting standards for extinction, how to protect our wildlife, how we can protect our environment? Do we need to set up something, for example, reporting standards? Do we need to set up an auditing procedures, quality assurance procedures?
Ideally, yes, I think all of those things would be wonderful. And remember, we had that really wonderful extinction workshop just before the lockdown, and a lot of these things were raised by you and by others as well. I think from my point of view at the moment, being, you know, not too ambitious with these things, but the extinction framework for accounting does fit neatly into integrated reporting. And again, that links to this holistic governance model, which is in, you know, it's this book here. I was going to talk about it at the beginning, but this book with Mervyn King, which basically includes the first version of the extinction accounting framework, and also shows that it's completely compatible with integrated reporting. Now, one of the things that I didn't talk about that's come out of the survey that we've all been doing is a call for mandatory reporting, mandatory approach. And I think that is going to be necessary probably. But then again, you need buy-in from the institutions, from policymakers. And I think this might be the time to be able to push for those things. And again, the main push for that type of reporting, it doesn't have to come from us. It needs to come from the investor communities, and the responsible investor communities are definitely going to be prioritising mandatory reporting in these areas connected to integrated thinking and an ecological governance perspective. That's what I think. That's what I hope is going to happen.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And Mohammed, I will finish the paper and submit it.
Thank you.
I promise. As soon as I can.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Anan. I'm in Kuwait. I'm so interested in the topic, and I have one question. What is your view, based on the conclusion you had, on the same topic, the implications on the investor engagement, but from the angle of the developing countries, like the Gulf countries, as they represent the rich countries and developing countries and other poor countries? So I'd like to hear from you. What do you think about that?
Well, of course, it's very challenging. I mean, if we look at issues such as deforestation, which is one of the main causal factors for these types of problems and transmissions, you know, there are challenges, obviously, to do with trying to provide employment and income for people in developing economies. I know that the WWF, for example, have been doing many, many projects in developing economies to try to provide alternative types of employment and income for people located in forests in those parts of the world where there are a lot of endangered species, etc. So one example is in South Africa. I know that the WWF have been working very hard to provide conservation awareness and conservation employment in conservation areas to African communities that in the past would have been tempted to be involved in poaching of species such as rhinoceros, etc. So, you know, there are all sorts of initiatives partnering between NGOs, wildlife NGOs, governments and companies, as well as local communities, to try to raise these issues. And I think it's probably even more important in some of these developing economies because they tend to be where we have the highest biodiversity still. You know, there are still rainforests and areas of wildlife which need to be protected, but also balanced by providing income to those populations and communities, if that makes sense.
Hello, Professor. Hi.
Hello. Oh, I can see you as well.
Hello, Prof. Khalid. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
I'm Hakim Rathman. I'm a professor at the American University of Malta. And I'd like to thank you first of all for your valuable presentation. One major research interest is about integrated reporting, and you worked on integrated reporting and the context of South Africa. As we all know, that integrated reporting involves not only financial resources but also natural resources. And the context of South Africa is unique because it's maybe the only one country where integrated reporting is required, is mandatory. It's not voluntary. I'm personally interested in conducting a cross-country study across a certain number of countries, and as far as I know, there is no other country maybe making this reporting or integrated reporting mandatory. Could you elaborate further on the other contexts that are quite similar to South Africa in order to extend the study or the context to other countries that are making mandatory? All the other countries are maybe we find some optional or voluntary disclosure on natural resources or CSR. Yeah.
There is quite a lot of evidence now that integrated reporting is starting to be the main form of annual reporting for companies in different countries around the world. So, I mean, it isn't exactly mandatory in South Africa. It's mandatory for companies which have a primary listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So it's effectively mandatory. But I think that what we're seeing is integrated reporting in Japan, in the UK, and top companies around the world as the form of reporting. So it's something which is happening. And I think, for example, if you look at the KPMG reports that are produced every couple of years or so, they've shown a shift in the last few years towards an integrated reporting form. And the name integrated reporting being used, and I mean, certainly Mervyn King himself has been all over the world promoting integrated reporting. I mean, attached to this is the concept of the Chief Value Officer, which is now starting to get traction all over the world, not just in South Africa, but, across Europe, in Japan, in different parts of the world. So, I think a cross-country study would be very, very interesting. I mean, I'd be very interested in looking at, interviewing people rather than just looking at disclosures and whatever from a statistical point of view. I think it's very important to talk to people and see and detect what changes there are in these contexts. But I think integrated reporting for me is the appropriate answer to a lot of our reporting problems. Another thing that comes out of our paper, which I didn't mention, is a frustration amongst the financial institutions and academia as well about the proliferation of reporting frameworks. So we're seeing all sorts of frameworks on biodiversity, etc., whereas really integrated reporting provides a vehicle that can incorporate all of these issues relatively easily.
Thank you.
I think that's probably everybody's questions now. I'm happy to come back and do another session if you want me to talk about something else, that we're doing in this sort of area.
Mariani, you have any question?
Yes, Angel. Can you hear me now? Hello.
Okay. I think that's everybody. I've written everybody down who's asked questions, so I will put your names on our paper as acknowledgement to say thank you for taking part in the discussion as well. Hope I don't leave anybody out.
Dr. Ahmed Dahani, you have any question? I don't hear you.
I think that's probably it now.
Okay. I think Dr. Ahmed, تفضل.
Yes, so can you hear me now? Hello, Joe.
Yeah. I'm asking now.
Can you hear me or not?
I can. I can see you as well.
Thank you for coming today, and thank you for talking. I want to talk about the stock market. What do you think about the effect of investment in the stock market, especially the Egyptian stock market? What I want to say, it will be the same like financial crisis in 2008, or similar to that, or what do you think about that?
I didn't hear the last bit there. Tailed off a little bit at the end.
It will be similar to the crisis financial in 2008, or what do you think, the investment in the stock market?
Oh, I think so. I think it's going to have at least as big an impact as the financial crisis, probably more so. But I think that the way that investments are being done needs to change significantly, because it's not sustainable the way that it is. Also, we're going to see a big impact on pensions, for example, pension funds and other institutional funds that are invested in stock markets. So, you know, that's another part of the crisis that people are only just starting to think about. It's making these linkages.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And I'm not an expert on the Egyptian stock market, I have to say. But in terms of the subject of what I'm talking about today, I am working with Abir Hassan and some other colleagues of mine on writing around Middle Eastern issues relating to biodiversity extinction and looking at frameworks for those contexts as well. So that's something I could talk about on another occasion if you want. Because we're all sitting at home, so it's very nice to be able to actually talk to people.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that you have done very well with answering a lot of questions there, Jill.
I've tried.
So thank you very much. And so all that remains for me to say is thank you everyone that's joined us, and I thank you very much for taking the time out to present to us today. Jill, it will really appreciated. Finally, I'd like to thank you very much, dear Prof. Jill, and my colleagues, and I want to thank you, dear Prof. Abir Hassan, and dear Prof. Khalid, and the
Thank you,
team,
Abir.
and all. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Jill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you
very much. Thank you. And listening to me, and thank you for asking me. I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah,
Bye.
soon. I hope to organize another seminars in the future.
Wonderful.
Soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.